The first thing you feel is the snap of the rope against your palms. It bites deep, slick with river water and tar, as the British clipper slides toward the dock like a predator closing in. The Pearl River is still dark, its surface broken only by the slow churn of the ship's hull. The morning air clings to your skin, hot and wet, carrying the stink of fish guts, burning coal, and unwashed bodies. The planks under your feet are already slick with yesterday's rain and the sweat of the men beside you. Shouts fly over the water, Cantonese and English tangling together, the words sharp enough to cut. Somewhere up on deck, a boot heel thuds, followed by the metallic clink of a spyglass snapping shut. A foreigner in a long black coat leans over the rail, pale eyes scanning the dock. He doesn't see you as a man, only as another pair of shoulders to carry his fortune ashore. Behind him, sailors crank open the cargo hatch, the wooden lid groaning like a wounded animal. The first chest appears, swinging slowly in the slings. Even before it lands, the air changes. A heavy, syrupy sweetness rolls out, thick enough to taste on your tongue. You know that smell. Everyone here does. You drop into a crouch as the crate thuds onto your back, the weight driving you down until your knees threaten to buckle. The edges bite into your flesh through the thin cotton of your tunic. A wrong step here means a crushed spine. A wrong look at the wrong person could mean worse. You start toward the warehouse, every step matched to the sway of the chest. Ahead, 2 Qing guards watch the line with bored eyes. One chews a strip of dried meat. The other rests his hand on the hilt of his saber, tapping it in a slow rhythm. But it's not them that makes you tense. It's the figure standing just beyond the gate. Robes of deep blue silk pooling around his ankles, his hands hidden in wide sleeves. His gaze fixes on the ship, then on you. Another chest lands behind you. The line of men moves like a living chain. You are halfway across the dock when a sound rips through the morning. Not a shout this time, but the crack of wood splitting open. Every head turns toward the ship. The sweet smell thickens, almost choking. The man in silk steps forward. The guards do not move, and you realize something has gone wrong. By the early 1800s, Britain was drowning in tea. Not literally, but in the way an empire drowns in its own appetite. Tea from China was no longer a luxury for the wealthy. It was the drink of dockworkers, merchants, and the Queen's own breakfast table. Every ship that returned from Canton carried crates of it stacked to the deck beams, filling London with the aroma of leaves from fields the British would never own. The problem was simple. China did not want what Britain had to sell. They did not care for wool or steel or the mechanical wonders of the Industrial Revolution. They wanted silver. It was the only currency the Qing court would accept in exchange for tea, silk, and porcelain. So silver poured out of Britain and into China like a river flowing uphill, draining the imperial treasury with each passing season. For British merchants, this was a slow kind of death. Every transaction with China was a one-way loss. The East India Company, with its charter to control trade in Asia, was desperate for a way to reverse the flow of wealth. The answer they found was not an invention, not a treaty, but a poison. India, under British control, was already thick with poppy fields. Farmers in Bengal and Malwa harvested the sticky brown resin in neat, precise cuts, the latex oozing into clay pots before being baked into hard lumps. The company bought it by the ton, packed it into chests, and sent it to sea. Opium could not be sold legally in China. That only made it more profitable. The smuggling began quietly. Small shipments, discreet buyers, deals made in the shadow of warehouses. But addiction works faster than law, and within years the market exploded. Sailors and private traders ferried it to the coast, where Chinese merchants and smugglers took over. For every chest of opium that entered China, another chest of silver left. The dock handlers did not see the whole strategy. They saw the ships coming in heavier than they left, the captains smiling wider each year, and the guards on the wharves growing lazier. Somewhere in the distance, tea ships still sailed for London. But now, their cargo was paid for, in a currency mined from the very veins of China itself. The silver pried loose by a nation hooked on the smoke they swore was only for pleasure. You were just one pair of hands in this machine, but even you could tell which way the balance was tipping, and it was not in China's favor. The Opium's journey began far from the damp heat of the Canton docks. Thousands of miles away, in the flat, baking fields of Bengal and Malwa, Indian farmers bent over poppy plants, slicing thin incisions into the swollen green pods. The latex bled out slowly, a milky sap turning brown in the sun, sticky as tar. It was scraped off with care, pressed into cakes, and packed in layers of poppy leaves. From there, the East India Company took control. In warehouses the size of temples, workers sealed the resin in wooden chests, each stamped with coded marks that meant nothing to anyone without the right ledger. To a customs inspector, the cargo might look like lacquerware or tea. To anyone else, the smell would give it away instantly. British clippers left Calcutta and Bombay heavy with the stuff. They were fast, sharp-keeled ships built to outrun trouble and keep ahead of the monsoon winds. The captains knew where to stop, where to linger, and which harbours were less watchful. The closer they came to Chinese waters, the more cautious the voyage became. The Qing Navy patrolled the coast, but a handful of bribes could thin their vigilance. The final transfer was often the trickiest. Big ships could not risk docking in plain view with a hold full of contraband. Instead, they anchored in sheltered coves or beyond the sandbars, where the opium was offloaded into swift, narrow junks manned by Chinese smugglers. The handlers in Canton rarely saw this part of the operation, but they felt it in the timing. Some mornings, the clipper would arrive empty, its cargo already spirited upriver in the dead of night. Other days, the goods came in through a haze of secrecy, everyone working twice as fast and speaking half as loud. Once in Canton, the chests moved through a chain of hands. Some went straight to hidden storerooms in the city, others to riverboats bound for towns deeper inland. Every movement was greased with silver. Every delay cost someone money. And for the men on the docks, the only job was to lift, carry, and look like you saw nothing at all. It was a system built on speed and silence. The faster the chest disappeared into the warehouse, the sooner the silver would return to the men who had sent it. And the sooner the next ship from India would be on its way, loaded with another harvest of poppies meant to feed the hunger that no imperial edict could starve. Silver had once been the lifeblood of China's economy. Taxes were paid in it, merchants traded in it, and the imperial treasury measured its stability by the weight of its reserves. For centuries, China had held the upper hand. Foreign traders had to bring silver to pay for what the empire produced, and the balance always tilted in the Qing dynasty's favor. That changed with the rise of opium. The trade ran like a mirror image of the tea roots, but the flow was reversed. Every chest of opium brought in meant silver going out, a steady stream pouring from markets, households, and provincial treasuries into the hands of foreign merchants. In the counting houses along the Pearl River, the tall stacks of silver ingots shrank month by month. On the docks, you saw it without ever touching a coin. The ships from India came in heavy, their hulls low in the water. They left high and light, their captains smiling at the profit sealed in their holds. Chinese merchants who once paid for silk or porcelain in copper coins now pulled silver from hidden drawers to buy what they could not stop smoking. In the city, pawn shops multiplied. Farmers sold tools to pay debts. Artisans gave up their workshops. Some households broke apart entirely, their land sold off to keep up with the price of a habit that deepened with every pipe. The silver that left for the sea never came back. Corruption followed the silver out. Officials found it easier to take bribes in foreign coin than to enforce imperial law. Inspectors stopped weighing ships so carefully. Even the guards at the dockside gate seemed more interested in the glint of a syce in a trader's palm than in the cargo passing under their noses. For Britain, the shift was a triumph. The silver that had once bled their economy now flowed back into London's banks, paying for the endless stream of tea that kept their own docks busy. For China, it was a slow suffocation. You could not see it in a single day's work, But year after year, the weight of silver leaving the country was the measure of something greater slipping away the grip of an empire on its own destiny. Your day began with the tide, and ended when the last chest disappeared into a warehouse you would never be allowed to enter. The work was as simple as it was brutal. A full opium chest weighed about 140 pounds, the corners cutting through the thin cotton of your tunic into the bone of your shoulder. You learned to take the weight in a crouch, then rise in a slow sway, your knees absorbing each step like the rocking of a boat. There was no rush in the movement, only rhythm. If you moved too fast, you stumbled, too slow, and the line behind you faltered. The smell of the cargo clung to you, a heavy sweetness that filled your mouth even when you breathed through your nose. By midday, the stench of sweat and river mud joined it, making the air so thick you could almost chew it. Some handlers chewed betel nut to keep their strength. Others wrapped cloth under their tunics to keep the edges of the crates from tearing open their skin. You learned to shift the load every few steps, the way an old sailor shifts his weight to match the roll of the deck. Every man on the dock had his own trick, but all of you shared one skill, keeping your mouth shut. You were not supposed to know what was inside the crates. The guards pretended not to see it. The foreign merchants pretended you were invisible. But the truth hung in the air with every chest, and sometimes in the streets, where you saw the same crates carried into tea shops that never served tea. Payment came in copper or silver, depending on the cargo's value and the mood of the overseer. A good day might feed your family for a week. A bad day might leave you bruised and empty-handed. Complaints were pointless. The dock was not a place for questions. It was a place where you moved, what you were told to move, and kept your eyes down. At night, when the air cooled and the river settled into its slow tide, the ache in your body reminded you of the day's weight. It was an ache you could live with. What worried you was the other weight, the one that seemed to grow in the city itself, the way the streets felt quieter now, the way certain men you once knew no longer came to work, and the way the smoke from the tea houses seemed to drift further every evening. At first, the opium dens were tucked out of sight, a narrow doorway behind a tea shop, a back room above a merchant's store, a darkened shed by the river where a single lamp burned all night. You could pass them without noticing, unless you caught the smell, a heavy, burnt sweetness that curled under the door and into the street. But hiding became pointless. The demand was too great. Soon, the dens opened their doors openly, lacquered signs swinging above the entrance, inviting anyone with silver to step inside. Inside, the light was low and golden, the air thick with layered smoke. Rich merchants lounged on carved couches, their robes sliding from thin shoulders as they leaned over long, slender pipes. The poor lay on straw mats, their eyes half closed, their chests rising and falling in slow, shallow breaths. You began to see the change on the docks. Men who once hauled crates beside you now slouched in alleyways, their eyes glassy, their skin pale. They stopped showing up for work, their strength and wages traded for another pipe. A few came back, thinner and weaker, unable to lift the loads they once carried with ease. In the markets, you saw women pawning family jewelry, boys selling baskets of rice for a few coins, all to pay debts that never seemed to end. Even the guards at the gates smelled faintly of the smoke, their vigilance dulled. When they searched a cart, it was with lazy hands, more interested in how much they could take than in what they might find. The city's pulse slowed. Streets that had once been loud with hawkers and the clatter of carts grew quieter. Boats still came upriver, but fewer men met them. The silver kept flowing out, and the smoke kept rolling in, settling over Canton like a low, unbroken fog. You carried your crates the same as always, but you began to notice how the balance of the city was shifting. It was no longer just trade. It was hunger, and it was everywhere. In the eyes of the merchants, in the empty stalls of the market, in the way the river seemed to move slower, under the weight of it all. The law said opium was forbidden. The reality said silver spoke louder. At the docks, the truth was in the way. Inspectors lingered by the mooring posts instead of the cargo, waiting for the subtle nod that meant a bribe was ready. A slip of silver, into an open palm, and suddenly the chest you carried was invisible. Some officials became regulars in the trade, their presence less about enforcing the law and more about ensuring their cut. They learned the timing of the ships, the smell of a fresh chest, and the foreign captains who paid generously to avoid questions. Even the guards at the gates developed a rhythm: the saber tap on a thigh, the slow blink, the faint tilt of the head toward the side alley where the payoff would be delivered. For the handlers, corruption was both protection and danger. It meant fewer searches, fewer raids, less chance of losing a day's wages to confiscation. But it also meant the work grew riskier in other ways. Bribes created rivals. Rivals brought grudges. More than once, you saw a handler beaten in the shadows because someone else wanted his position in the line. The city shifted under this weight. Money flowed, but not where it should. The silver that once built bridges and repaired levees now bought silk robes for men who never worked a day on the docks. The officials who smiled in public spent their nights in the same smoke-filled rooms as the merchants they were meant to police. Even the foreign merchants noticed. They spoke in low voices, exchanging information about which inspectors were cheap, which needed more persuasion, and which had developed habits that could be exploited. You learned early that your job was not just to lift and carry. It was to keep your head down when the bribes changed hands, to look away when a chest went to the wrong warehouse, to keep your voice steady if a guard stopped you, and to never, ever suggest you knew more than you should. And yet, every time you saw a pipe glowing in an official's hand, every time you heard the soft jingle of coins in the shadows, you understood what it meant. The city was not being robbed in the dark. It was being sold in daylight, one chest at a time. In the spring of 1839, the mood on the docks shifted overnight. The new imperial commissioner, Lin Zexu, had arrived in Canton with a single mission from the emperor: stop the opium trade completely. His orders were absolute, and unlike the inspectors who had lined their sleeves with silver, he refused to be bought. The first sign came when the harbour patrol doubled. Sleek junks with black-painted hulls began gliding along the wharves at dawn, their decks crowded with soldiers in matching armour. Every ship was inspected. Cargo holds were emptied and searched. Dockside warehouses were sealed, their owners hauled away for questioning. Then came the seizures. Chests were taken from ships and warehouses alike, stacked in the open under guard. The smell of raw opium, usually hidden behind closed doors, now drifted openly through the streets. The piles grew until they seemed taller than a man. You saw foreign captains arguing in clipped tones, their faces tight with anger. You saw Chinese merchants sweating in silence, knowing their fortunes had just been dragged away under armed watch. The destruction began on a clear morning. Soldiers pried open the chests with iron bars, smashing the resin blocks inside into chunks. Lime powder was thrown over the remains. It stings sharp in your nose, even from a distance. Buckets of water turned the mixture into a foul slurry, which was shoveled into trenches and washed into the sea. The smoke of the burning wood mixed with the sour, chemical tang of the lime, a smell that clung to your clothes long after you left. Some handlers were called in to move the confiscated chests, but the work felt different. This was not the quiet, well-paid lifting of cargo under a captain's watchful eye. This was the forced labor of dismantling an empire's most profitable trade. Soldiers watched every movement, and there was no pay at the end of the day. Rumors ran along the docks like rats. Britain would not let this stand. The foreign merchants spoke of lost fortunes, of insult to their honor, of warships already on the way. For the first time in years, the docks were quieter. Ships came less often, and when they did, they were met with drawn swords instead of open palms. Yet, even as you watched the opium dissolve into the water, you wondered how long the silence could last. Something this profitable did not die easily, and if the foreigners were as angry as they seemed, the next ships might not come for trade at all. The first British warships appeared on the horizon like black teeth, their masts of forest against the sky. Word spread along the docks before the sails were even close enough to make out the flags. These were not merchant clippers. They were built for speed and destruction, their iron cannons capable of tearing apart the riverfront in minutes. Trade did not stop. Not entirely. Some ships still slipped into harbor under false flags, their cargo hidden under layers of legitimate goods. But the pace slowed. Each delivery carried more risk. Every foreign captain seemed sharper, quicker to anger, as if time itself had grown short. You kept working, because what else was there to do? The war, when it came, was not a single thunderclap but a slow roll of thunder creeping closer with each passing day. You heard it in the distant booms upriver, where the British tested their guns against coastal forts. You saw it in the faces of merchants who counted their silver twice before daring to spend it. When the fighting reached Canton, it was like watching the tide reverse. Ships you once unloaded now fired on the very harbor they used to approach for profit. Buildings along the waterfront burned. The smell of salt and smoke mixed with the stink of spilled opium from shattered crates. The river ran black with debris. Still, even during bombardments, some work went on. The dockside network was too stubborn, too practiced, to shut down entirely. A few handlers moved crates under cover of night, slipping them into hidden boats that pushed upriver where the warships could not follow. Those runs were paid in more silver than you had ever seen, but each one carried the risk of being caught between two sides who no longer cared who you were. Foreign soldiers marched through the streets, their boots leaving deep prints in the muddy lanes. Some looked at you with the same indifference as the captains you had served. Others eyed you as if you were part of the enemy. You were neither. You were just the man carrying the weight, waiting for someone else's decision to decide your future. And all the while, the smoke did not stop. The den stayed open, even when the city walls shook with cannon fire. The people kept smoking, because war or no war, the craving was stronger than fear. It was then you understood. The guns were here for silver, but the real victory had already been won, one pipe at a time. By 1842, the war was over, though it did not feel like a victory for anyone in Canton. The Treaty of Nanking was read aloud in the streets, but the words were meant for governments, not for men like you. You only understood the parts that mattered. More ports would be open to foreign ships. Hong Kong would be given to the British, and the silver would keep flowing out. The docks grew busy again, but the work was different. Now the foreign ships did not sneak into harbor. They came openly, their flags snapping in the wind, their captains strolling ashore with the confidence of men who no longer needed bribes. The guards at the gates stood back without being told. Even the inspectors seemed to vanish, replaced by clerks with ledgers who asked no questions. Opium was no longer a shadow trade. Chests were unloaded in daylight, their sweet smell drifting across the dock without shame. Merchants bought and sold openly, silver changing hands faster than ever. The work for a handler was steadier now, but there was no mistaking what it meant. You were no longer part of something hidden. You were part of something sanctioned, protected by treaty, and impossible to stop. In the city, the changes cut deeper. The addiction that had once spread quietly now consumed entire neighborhoods. Tea shops closed, replaced by dens where the light never changed. Pawn shops crowded the streets, their windows stacked with the remnants of lives traded away for another pipe. You saw fewer strong backs at the dock. Many of the men you had worked beside were gone, some lost to smoke, some to sickness, some to debts they could not pay. The ones who remained moved slower, their eyes dull, their hands trembling even when empty. The Qing dynasty still ruled from Beijing, but in Canton, it was clear the real power lay elsewhere. The warships still came, but now they came as escorts for merchant fleets, their guns pointed outward toward other threats. Foreign merchants lived in fine houses overlooking the river, their fortunes built on the weight you carried each day. And so the empire shifted, not with a single collapse, but with a steady bending toward those who had taken its silver, its trade, and its pride. On the dock, you kept walking the same path from ship to warehouse, but you knew the truth. The war had ended, yet the loss had only begun. History will remember the treaties, the battles, and the men in fine uniforms who signed their names at the bottom of them. It will speak of warships and gunpowder, of diplomacy and defeat. But it will not remember the men who carried the weight that made it all possible. Men like you, whose backs bent under the same crates that drained a nation's strength. You were only one link in the chain, a chain that began in the poppy fields of Bengal, crossed oceans on the keels of British clippers, and wound its way up the Pearl River to the heart of Canton. Each chest you carried left behind a trail that could be measured in silver, in smoke, and in the slow crumbling of an empire that once believed itself unshakable. The work never changed. The crates were still heavy, the pay still thin, the air still thick with that cloying sweetness. But the city around you had changed beyond recognition. The markets were quieter, the river seemed slower, and in every alley, behind every shuttered door, the smoke curled upward in lazy spirals that no law could catch. Empires rarely fall with a single blow. More often, they are undone in small moments, in the silent exchange of a bribe, in the lifting of a crate, in the passing of silver from one hand to another. You were there for those moments. You carried them on your shoulders, and when the historians write of the empire's collapse, they will speak of the wars and the treaties. But you will know that it was not the cannons that broke it. It was the quiet labor of countless unseen hands, each step a little closer to the end. If you have stayed with me to this point, you now carry the story too. Tell me in the comments what you would have done on those docks, looked away or walked away. And if you want to keep your place in the crowd for more stories history tried to forget, press like, subscribe, and stay until the next ship comes in.